and the speakers. So my name's Emma Fenby and I work with the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands on which we meet and noting that we all meet on potentially different lands this morning. We're very lucky this week to have EY helping us with some seminars for the sector. We had one on Monday about workforce and global perspectives for human services workforces with the coronavirus. And if you'd like that presentation, if you weren't able to attend, do let me know. And today we've got one on practical strategies for financial viability during COVID-19, and really pleased that Cameron Verdepark with his colleagues will present today. So the slides have been sent to you. They're also on the screen. If you've got any questions, there's the chat function that we'll monitor. And obviously I'll be taking notes and I'll send them out after the seminar so that everyone's got them. So Cameron, are you happy if I hand over to you now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Emma. And thanks everyone for making time today. It's a real privilege to have the opportunity to connect with all during an uncertain time. And so I'll aim to present for about 25 minutes, maybe half an hour, so we can leave some time for questions and things to discuss. The presentation we've got is aimed for the NGO sector, so some of the comments might not be very specific to child and family welfare, in that covers a number of organisations. But certainly we want to acknowledge that when it comes to financial viability and business continuity, as NGOs or for-purpose organisations, you have different objectives and different goals compared to, say, a more for-profit organisation. So we've linked in with our corporate recovery team to prepare these materials, as well as our tax team in regards to the government stimulus package, and shaped it in a way that hopefully it'll be some value to you today. There's also a slide at the end about well-being, which Sonia will talk to, and you might ask, why are we talking about financial viability and well-being at the same time? I think there's a bit of background noise there, so if you can go on mute. I think well-being and a positive attitude when talking about financial viability is really key, and the more you can approach these with a very positive attitude, I think the more you'll be in a better position to be able to manage any continuity challenges you might have. So we'll talk about, you can see the agenda there, there's some aspects around business continuity generally. Talk about financial management, a bit of a focus on financial management we're asked to do. We'll do an overview of some of the government stimulus opportunities that are to those organisations, to your organisations. Some of those are really hot off the press even a few days ago. And then we've got some information about a financial checklist, and we'll finish with wellbeing. Next slide, thank you. Thanks, Mel. And while I'm at it, I'm joined here by Mel Leff, who's a director in our team, Sonia and Georgie Gates, as well as Dean Yates, I think, is joining us as well as the head of our Victorian government team in Victoria. So a real broad spectrum of experience available today. So probably just starting off in terms of continuity of financial viability, there's probably just three broad comments I wanted to make. Is planning your response. I think it's very easy, and we've seen it in all organisations that in the last few weeks, is there is a tendency in the absence of a plan, you can really maybe be overcome by all the various things that you think you should be considering. So definitely sitting down, taking some time, plan, certainly over the forthcoming weeks, but even on a daily basis, planning the activities you're doing. Decisive and transparent leadership. This might be something that's very clear to everyone, but I think certainly being transparent to your key stakeholders on the basis of decisions you're going to make, and being decisive and moving quickly and on a timely basis. I think it really does help you in maintaining some momentum and confidence in what you decide to do, really helps the stakeholders around you. And the key is how do we achieve those things? I think it's very easy to say that, but doing it, I think, and making sure we're making the right decisions at the right time, it's probably the thing we're concerned about. So we'll cover a few of those points on this presentation. Next slide, thanks. So we see, in terms of actions around business continuity, we see sort of 4 buckets. Putting people's safety first. This is overlapping a little bit with what Sonia was talking about Monday. You know, our staff, our clients, our key stakeholders. I think naturally in the area of service that you're all in, this probably is something that is front of mind. What we find too is if you do take care of that, you can then free up the time to take care of these other matters which are more financial. Communicating with the stakeholders, whether it's about changes in service or financial matters, particularly with your staff, is really key. Staff can get a bit stressed around this time, certainly around continuing to do their role in the environment they're in, but also just around job security. And so communication with stakeholders, particularly your staff, we've found is really key. As you might have seen, Ernst & Young moved quite quickly to moving to working from home arrangements. Our leader itself is providing regular communications to all our staff, and what we find that's really built in some confidence for people. Reshaping strategy to maintain business continuity. Very fancy words there. Ultimately, it's around doing things differently. I go back to Sonia's marvellous presentation on Monday, where we were talking about use of telehealth, other ways of doing things differently in an environment which is providing some constraints, where we're used to engaging with our stakeholders and our staff physically, verbally. Really is this is the kind of services that you're in rely on that. So having to do things differently means having to reshape the way you do things to maintain some continuity. And then building resistance and preparing for recovery, which is something a bit down the track when it's time to recover to a new business as usual. Next slide, thank you. So just a few moments on business continuity before we get more into the financial side of things. It's always good to have a business continuity plan, and these are some of the features of business continuity plans. And really the right-hand side, risk, looking at the impact of events and having a planned response for those events. These are things that are good to plan for. One thing we've observed, and most, I'd say every organisation in Australia didn't really have a business continuity plan for a global pandemic. I think that goes without saying. So don't be concerned that if you dust off your business continuity plan, that it just doesn't have all these plans. We've had to really think on our feet. But probably a few things: risk management, having a risk register. You know your service better than anyone, and really absorbing on a daily basis the kind of risks you think you're exposed to, documenting them, documenting the likely impact, what's the consequence, and who's therefore, how should we respond, and who's accountable. Some of those sort of standard risk processes. Business impact analysis. If an event occurs, what is the potential impact on our business? It's very empowering to, while it can be concerning about really, events that might occur, but really thinking about it and say, well, what would we do about that? What can we do about that? And really, as people who really know your operations better, thinking about, well, this is probably our response, and putting a plan in place is really effective for your organisation. And then the response plan. So when there's an incident, these are the people who will have responsibility for that. Nothing ever happens as it's intended. The event that actually occurs isn't exactly what's in your risk register. Having a plan in place is really good. The recovery and test, that's for later, so we can talk about that later. Now, if you don't have a plan, we have seen some really good examples of what businesses are doing that don't require huge planning, because we're not an environment where we can sit down and take a week to put together a plan. We're in an environment where there needs to be action and people like to see it. So we've identified 9 things that organisations in the NGO space we've found have made a priority and have had instant benefit to them to be able to maintain their operations. I mentioned health and safety around employees, a financial management plan, which I'll go into a little bit more detail after this slide. Incidents management team meeting daily. So really you'll have, depending on the size of your organisation, and I'm definitely cognizant that not everyone are large organisations, but having a group of people who are designated to manage incidents as they occur and allowing a time for them to meet daily is really good, even if there's no incidents. It's connect daily, it's reinforcing, every day there seems to be a new idea that someone has or a new issue that people might have. So certainly connecting every daily at a regular time, we've found is very useful for people to just manage incidents as they arise, maintain confidence, maintain morale, which is really critical during this time. Recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer. We wanted to make sure that was on the list. I think there's some marvellous direction, obviously, at state and federal levels around distancing and isolation. Appreciate there's also some questions around what they mean, but really relying on those groups. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. 5 and 6 is around essential services. So I mentioned about reshaping your services for business continuity. Certainly sitting back and saying, well, how might we do things differently? Prioritising what you consider an essential service. Can some services be delivered online? Do we need to maintain certain services? I think certainly being part of an NGO myself at a board level, I would probably say every service we provide is essential. But we are in an interesting time where we want to make sure, safety and care is delivered at its best. If there's something we no longer have to do, so we can divert that time to do new things. Basically, one thing we know is you can't start something without stopping something. So have a think about that. Operating guidelines, document the changes you make, have them documented. It doesn't have to be very long and detailed, but certainly deciding what you do differently, putting it down on paper, locking it away. It means if that person who's in charge of implementing that service in your organisation has to move to a different role, there's something documented there for another person, and you don't have to spend a lot of time retraining. Communication strategy, as I mentioned, very important. FAQs on your website and setting up a client inquiry hotline. Again, really good mechanisms, gives confidence to the people you serve that you're connected and there's access for them for advice if they need it. So on the next slide, I'll spend a little bit of time on this one, and really it's probably around the financial management of your business, of your operation. Really around this time, depending on what's going to impact, ultimately things are slowing for some, things are increasing for others in terms of needing to respond to services. Either way, our businesses are going through lots of change, and cash management and management of your cash on hand is really important for you to be able to do what you need to do. And so I've got 4 headings there that myself and the team put together. In terms of cash management, what do we mean? Really seeing what cash you have on hand, managing it in the context of your crisis management, i.e. You've identified in terms of response to COVID-19 certain events that could occur and that could have a financial implication. Considering what that impact is something to consider when you're looking at maintaining your cash levels. Cash flow forecasting and looking at different scenarios. So what do we mean by forecasting? It's really just looking ahead. And I don't feel that you need to look too far ahead, but literally it's at the moment, for example, how far you might look. It really could be a matter of weeks, could be a matter of a few months. You can see everyone's not really looking beyond September at the moment. in terms of anything during the uncertainty. So week to week forecasting, thinking about, okay, well, if this happens, this might happen. It's really good, very empowering to just understand what you've got, what might happen, and then you're in a good position to act. Second category there on government stimulus. You would have heard a lot and seen a lot about various government stimulus packages available to organisations. That is what we're going to go into a little bit more in the next couple of slides around what is available to you. But a few things: contact your government agencies. These are organisations that are your customers, but also the agencies who are advertising and reporting the packages that are available to you. Contact your financial institutions. Speak to your bank. They are very aware of all the stimulus and opportunities you have as small to medium businesses to sustain your operations. And they're a very good source, and they're incentivized to really support you. And so don't feel like you have to know everything. Use a source like your bank. Work with your finance team and work with your accountants as well, because there's a range of sources, and you want to make sure you're making all the best decisions for your organisation. Spend reduction. Now, you probably see we haven't got a title there that says, maximising accounts receivable cash inflow. With non-NGOs, we recognise, depending on what your organisation is, you have different funding models, and some of these aren't funding models that some of them might be block grants, activity-based funding models coming from government, and things like that. So we haven't really got a lot of emphasis on how you can maximise your cash inflow. We've got a couple of tips which I'll talk about soon, but certainly spend reduction we wanted to spend a bit of time about. There definitely isn't an organisation going around that regularly sits down and reviews every line of expenditure that they incur on a regular basis. And so this is something we're definitely encouraging all organisations to do. Review all your expenditure. Can it be deferred? Is it essential? Can you reduce it? Look at your delegations policy in terms of approvals for expenditure, because depending on the scale of your organisation, some parts might have authority to spend certain amounts, and you might want some increased controls over that. Look at your controls about appointment of all sorts of, probably say, non-essential expenditure. You can see we've got stationery, controls around overtime, and things like that, really to effectively manage your cash outflow without disrupting the continuity of your service. We've got their CapEx, or capital expenditure. What do we mean by that? Projects. So at any point in time, you might have a project that you're doing that is a one-off project. It could be a fit out of a facility. It could be installation of certain things. Now, some of these things, we've had to, around, say, PP&E and other things, we've wanted to accelerate, deployment of these things for our customers. But there could be projects that just aren't essential. Consider reducing or deferring those capital projects. Some of these projects can be quite expensive, and deferring them is definitely a good way just to manage your cash levels. And finally, debt facilities. Again, the extent to which you borrow, some of you might not borrow money, but some of you might have loan facilities with banks. Assessing your capacity to borrow, and talking to your financial institutions about that capacity is a very good way to manage your cash needs. Confirming those arrangements with your banks. We have things like this. For larger organisations, there might be certain debt covenants and things you can't or can breach or can borrow up to. Now, I'm not saying encouraging you to borrow. Certainly, any borrowing decision should be made in accordance with what your usual practices are and what your usual risk tolerance is. But certainly, speaking to your banks about what's available and also the stimulus concessions available to you with your borrowings are really good to confirm. So just moving on to the next slide. So there are a range of government assistance measures available. Now this is a summary. We've spoken to our and connected with our tax team to present this table, and it's something that we're finding there's quite a bit of advice going out to various organisations around what's available to you at the federal level and the state level. So the next three slides, we have a summary. You might have more detailed questions around applicability. We'll see if we can answer those questions, but they might be ones that we refer to our specific tax group who can give you really applicable advice around these things. So just running down those categories though, there's small to medium business cash flow support for organisations who have turnover of less than $50 million, which definitely applies to many of you. And that's around getting payments based on salaries and wages that you usually withhold. It goes up to 100% of that amount, capped at $50,000. Even if you don't withhold any, you are eligible for $10,000 straight away. And that's something that can be sourced through your VAT statements and is available to all small, medium businesses who withhold tax for their employees. Instant asset write-off, again, available to organisations if you're planning on spending money on assets, on equipment. They've increased the level of write-off that's available, obviously for for-purpose organisations, because for completeness, we haven't taken out income tax related measures here. So some of these things may not be a large requirement for you, but some of them may be relevant. Accelerated depreciation is another one. Again, this just allows organisations to purchase equipment earlier than later, and it's designed to stimulate the economy. Support for apprentices and trainees, definitely, certainly to the trade sector, that is a very healthy subsidy. ATO administrative concessions, deferral of tax payments, GST payments, PAYG instalments, and you can change the cycle on those. And also the one probably message there is, if there's a need to connect with the ATO, is to speak with them and go on plans for payments. They are open to discussions around adjusting payment timing for plans, because this all comes down to maintaining your cash, and they're definitely incentivised for you to remain cash healthy. SMEs, there's a guarantee scheme for organisations who aren't used to borrowing or usually don't have access to borrowing. The government is guaranteeing 50% of new loans up to $250,000 for eligible lenders for small and medium entities. Again, a source of liquidity if you require it in accordance with your usual practices for borrowing. There's temporary relief, financial distress to businesses. You can see that this is getting more into the area of insolvency, where the threshold for determining if someone's been trading while insolvent has been broadened. I would say this is a good time to, maybe you're having queries from directors of your organisations who are a bit concerned about whether or not they're going to be breaching rules if cash levels are getting low. Really good for a director to understand that there's been a increase in this threshold for which creditors can issue a statutory demand on a company. And so if you feel like your resources are getting low and directors are getting nervous, that's something to ease their mind. And just the bottom, I can't read that bottom one, but what's that one say, Mel? It's extension of the AIS submissions. So that's just a extension of the annual information statements, which are provided to you and your organisations. That's a high level summary of those. We thought we'd put a slide together just because it is a recent announcement about the wage subsidy, the JobKeeper announcement, $130 billion announced by the government. So between the original stimulus, the support for the financial services sector, and this, we're getting up to I didn't think we'd say it, but it's $250 billion of stimulus, which the federal government is providing. So that's their payments per worker per fortnight, and really just to a big response to growing concern around unemployment levels in the country. Got some high-level notes there about eligibility, around employee eligibility. I realise for an organisation, those kind of, you look at those and say, okay, but what if I stood down an employee, on this date, am I still eligible? So you might have some questions about that. We'll see the extent to which we can answer them, but if you do, definitely provide those questions, and that's something we can maybe provide some written advice subsequent to this session about. Next slide, thanks, Mel. Victorian government as well has definitely has put its hand up to support small to medium businesses, and there's a summary there. One thing state governments do, again, payroll tax, if we're not-for-profits, where we might be exempt from these payments, but also there's deferral of land tax payments. Commercial rent relief. This is an interesting space, and it is so there is relief available for commercial tenants, which you can apply. I think there'll be more discussion and more announcements from government around rent relief, because while as certainly in the broader space, so a lot of businesses are closing, and there's a big risk of evictions by landlords, and so I think there'll be more news and more government action to certainly reduce the potential incidents of that down the future. Outstanding supplier invoices. You'll see government will pay outstanding supplier invoices within 5 business days. So a lot of organisations, we've realised, are used to being paid by government on a particular cycle, but they're releasing funds earlier and really fast-tracking outstanding invoices to you. So our advice would be to connect with the relevant division within government who pay your invoices and who you send your invoices to, because we're seeing their government's doing a very good job to fast-tracking those payments, and that's certainly welcomed by many organisations. So the last slide there before wellbeing, it's a bit of a checklist. I won't go through the checklist in detail, but certainly I mentioned around outstanding receivables, government paying on time, and there's some other checks and things to maybe just run your eye down, and probably pass on this slide to whoever your financial accountant is or your financial controller who manages the cash inflow and outflow of your organisation, and say, come back to me with ticks and crosses, and hopefully, and no doubt they'll come back to you with a lot of ticks, hopefully within a day. But we've found this has been a useful checklist. We have more broader checklists that go into some real detail for large organisations, but with this one, we wanted to just say, well, what are the non-negotiables that you want to make sure you're ticking off there? So there's, in terms of the financial viability, appreciate there's a lot that we've skimmed over there, and you have a copy of that. Maybe before we open to questions, I might invite Sonia to talk about well-being in the context of financial viability.
Okay, thanks, Pam. And just a reminder to people of the chat function on this screen, because you can send in little questions as we go, because we've got quite a few people on the line. So we know that there's lots of this COVID-19, management of COVID-19, from workforce to delivery, that keep us awake at night. But for many of us, the prospect of not being viable and not being able to pay the bills and not being able to maintain a decent cash flow is one of the things that really causes distress. And we're already seeing with many of our clients, and also within our own workforce, a kind of whole questioning about, well, where do we go from here? Will everybody just close down and have to stay at home? What does that mean? So it is a worrying time, both personally and professionally. So an attention on well-being is really, really important, because we have to ride this storm. We know it's short-lived, relatively. 6 months, 2021 looks a lot better. So we need to attend. And what we would do is we call out 5 key areas to focus on. One of the most important things we're finding at the moment through the work that we're doing is connectivity. So creating targeted connection and being very deliberate about how we connect with people in our teams through this crisis. So we're building in moments of connectivity that are not just to do with work. So we're doing virtual coffees, and we're advising clients to do the same virtual coffees. We've got, actually, funny enough, I just got a notice arrived just now saying our virtual walk is starting. So getting people out walking and chatting while they walk, and building those in on a daily basis, as well as knowing who might be vulnerable in the conversations we have. So say, for example, I'll give you an EY example. We've established cluster groups where we've got a group of about 10 people connected together who are having a daily conversation or twice a week conversation about how we're feeling, how we're working through this. So bringing the wellbeing conversation very visibly into the conversations we're having, and being very deliberate and visible in enabling those conversations. We also know that purpose is always crucially important. It's crucially important at all times, but when we're going through any kind of crisis, understanding and remembering why is it that we're here is really important. Of course, the work that you do in the human services sector is really important, and all of your workforce, without exception, come to work because they believe passionately in what they do, and that sense of purpose is a great is a really important mainstay of being well, remembering why we're here, what we're doing, and finding different ways and better ways and alternative ways of how we're going to continue to work forward, and being generous in that. In the way that we work, and on Monday we covered some of this, so I won't reiterate it too much, but we know that helping our employees to find ways of working virtually, working from home, that actually are sustainable and that support well-being. So we're encouraging people to take exercise, checking in with people like, what have you done today? How have you got outside? Have you got your fresh air? Thinking about how you adapt your workspaces, how you manage the rhythm of your work, so that you do have a start and a stop to the work that we're doing, but taking time to do small experiments as we go, so that we can continually improve the way that we're working virtually, and finding more and more interesting and creative ways of dealing with that, and bringing to the fore the conversation. So we have been talking, say for example, with our teams about the fact that it is lonely sometimes at work, or it can be working from home, or it can be crazy when you've got 20 people living in the house with you, pets, pressures of family overseas or family in another state that you can't connect with, and all that kind of thing, and bringing those things to the fore and making it okay to talk about them. We've also done virtual relaxation sessions, so yoga, mindfulness, and making those part of our day, so that we are building in protective strategies. I won't talk about finances because Cam's just talked about those very ably, but keeping a close eye and managing the important basics is really important. And then finally coming back to health, that we know that mental and physical health is going to be crucially important for us during this period. And in the context of Australia, which one of the things that I love about living here is the focus on well-being and health. So, you know, the fact that there's no Saturday morning sport, most sporting clubs have stopped, the local gyms and swimming pools and etc. are closed. So in really maintaining a rhythm and routine of fitness in our lives. If it's get out for a walk every day. I must tell you, by the way, my dog last night refused to go for a walk with me at the end of the day because it had already been taken out for 5 walks. It had had enough. You know, going out for a walk, getting some fresh air, going for a jog, a cycle, whatever you can do, and building a new rhythm and routine of sport in your life. And of course, making sure that we are eating healthily, that we don't kind of like have the little line that goes from our desk to our fridge or our cupboard for those snacks, but having healthy snacks on hand. So I was talking to somebody the other day who said, I'm keeping a box of veggies, raw veggies in the fridge, and if I want a snack, I go to that. Somebody else I was talking to this morning, one of the CEOs that I'm working with, said, I'm actually thinking about wearing my swimming costume to work so that I remind myself that I love my body the way it is and I want to keep it that way. Which of course we can do now, we're working virtually, but sort of like so keeping healthy eating, healthy lifestyle. And the other thing as well is let's just keep Friday night drinks to Friday night, because another thing that I'm picking up, and we're picking up with a lot of the CEOs and people that we're working with, that because people are working at home, they're falling into unhelpful habits of, say for example, thinking, oh actually I'm just at home, so I will have that glass of wine with my dinner during the week, rather than saying actually that's something that I'm just going to stick to 1 or 2 nights a week, usually at the weekend. So all of those things are really important. Find time to relax, and as CEOs and leaders of the business, you must look after yourselves if you are going to look after your workforce. So make yourself a priority, don't drive yourself too hard, give yourself breaks. Thanks, Cam.
Great, thank you, Sonia. So, so you're happy to, with the time we have left, we have about 20 minutes to open up to questions. Maybe Deb, if you can sort of help.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I just want to say thank you, Cameron and Sonia. Like, we are getting such wonderful feedback from the work that you're doing with us on these live webinars. People are just really such lovely feedback. So I just want to say thank you from the outset. There is a question that Joe has put to us. Hello, Joe, about privacy limitations. So as we're all moving to Zoom and Team and all of those types of platforms, there are emerging questions about privacy, because in this rush for us all to be able to function, and some of the questions that have come up today have been about the functionality of Zoom and its privacy limitations. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity for us to have a further conversation with you about the analysis you may well have done about the technologies, what's less and more secure, and guide us through that conversation, because Zoom's come up as one, obviously, in more recent days.
Deb, I'll just come in there because I was in a conversation just yesterday actually about this, and not just about Zoom, but about all of the different platforms that are available. And so I have undertaken to kind of reach out to, we haven't got floors of them now because they're all working at home, but we've got lots of people who this is their job, and they completely understand the kind of technology and what its limitations are. So I've undertaken to come back on that, so we can easily share and maybe even do a session on technological solutions,
that would be brilliant.
what you can use, how you can use it, but also what you have to be careful about. And I know that some of our other clients are not using either Zoom or Teams because of security concerns, not so much privacy but security, and they are using Java Cisco. That's very old, but still.
There you go. That's really interesting. I think there are real differences, aren't there, Sonia, between some of these meetings and client-facing meetings, and I think that, you know, in a way we need to differentiate, but that would be amazingly useful. There's another webinar title. That's fantastic.
There you go. That'll be the next one.
There we go. We've got another one. There are some other questions up there about practice guidelines for infection control measures. Certainly, we've got quite a lot of information on that, Katrina. We will guide you to. And this other one here, we could really benefit from support on this as what IT solutions are available. And Sonia and EY are clearly best placed to help us with at least guide that conversation. So as soon as we've worked with Cameron and Sonia, we'll work out how quickly we can bring that next webinar to you. Are there other questions that aren't on the chat that people would like to ask? We've got at least another 15 minutes. I know I love these slides, so they'll definitely come out to you. But Jennifer, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's actually about slide number 4, which I think is a very helpful slide, because not to think, well, I'm looking at that thinking it's not linear in terms of a process that we're experiencing with this. Obviously, what I'm looking at in terms of our own organisation, we're moving through it at different periods and sort of different focuses. So while we're always with putting people's safety first, we're also looking at that reshaping the strategy, number 3, number 4 already, that we've got to be thinking in advance of the what ifs, but trying to do some of that planning. And it's counterintuitive at times that when there's uncertainty, you actually can do planning. So I think number 3 and number 4 is really helpful on that. So that's a fabulous slide, and a good reminder, I think, with regard to our work. So thanks for that.
So Cameron, did you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, just probably brief. Yeah, really, thank you for that comment, and I think it does. It really does highlight, I think, planning ahead rather than taking action from day to day, I think can really help the confidence and certainty that your organisation has when you're going into a period where there is some uncertainty. If you have a plan, then you can adjust that plan. And also, I'll probably reinforce, you don't have to spend weeks on plans. I think we're all discovering that things we usually work on for weeks, we're managing to produce in a few hours at the moment. Just by connecting people together, you get a small group of passionate people who have a different perspective on things. You can put a plan on a page, in a couple of hours, and revisit it the next day and things like that. So
can I add something there?
Yes.
It's Dean Yates here. Just 2 points. At the end of the day, what we're talking about here is it's actually not rocket science. It's probably the sorts of things we should be doing anyway, as leaders, managers, people who drive an organisation. But I suppose what's really different this time is that the significance attached to all of our decisions has just gone up a level. So the sorts of things on that slide, it's a great reminder at any point in time, but just at the moment, there's just a sharper edge to it. And it's probably just more important to be drifting across to the 3 and 4 there than perhaps in a normal week. The other comment is that unlike any event I think any of us have ever experienced, every organisation you can think of is going through the same thing here. So no one is alone. It's uncharted territory for everyone. So if at any point you feel just a bit reticent about what you're doing and feeling a bit uncertain, just get some comfort from the fact that each and every organisation, big, small, professional, volunteer, is going through exactly the same thing. And never hesitate, I think, to test with others, what they're doing and how they're going about it, because I think there's great lessons to be learned and shared from what is genuinely uncharted territory.
Can I whack in a comment there too on that?
Yes, Luke.
Oh, great. Sorry. It's just a comment and sort of a caveat about where we started with business planning, and just going on from that last expression, which I agree with. I was getting a bit cheesed off because some of our funding partners were demanding to know what our business continuity plan was fairly early on in this. And it just struck me as fairly inappropriate because we are dealing with a situation that is universal. And with our usual business continuity plans, there might be expectations of seeking help or resources from other quarters, like workforce. But in this situation, everybody is affected. And it just worried me that there was almost an expectation that we as a community organisation could fix and solve all the problems that this crisis has caused. It was a bit like using the analogy of our sector, saying to one of our families, you're in poverty, fix it yourself, when in fact there's, inequality is much more than beyond the family. So I don't disagree with the whole idea. We have to do the planning, and but I'm just worried that there might be some blame shifting or expectations which are completely unrealistic.
Yeah, I think it's Cameron here. I think that's a really fair call, and certainly in a time of crisis, that's it's a natural reaction sometimes to have partners ask questions like that. A good response to that is in this environment, A, you're working on it, but B, no business continuity plan should stay rigid or stagnant. I would say these are things that you revise every day, and sometimes people just need a response. Leveraging those 9 points is for example a good response. It's an unfortunate consequence of these unprecedented times that fear does result in some questioning. I think as leaders, embracing some of the comments that Sonia has is certainly being confident and stepping over the negative question and saying, don't worry, we're working on this, but also it'd be great if we got some assistance from you. Because I think if there's one term I'd say that everyone's been using a lot is connection, and it's just so relevant sitting in an isolated environment, whether it's connecting with your bank or your neighbour or a funding partner. I find I haven't heard a scenario where connecting with someone has resulted in a bad outcome. I'll stop there though. Thank you for that statement.
I might just make a comment about. I think Luke's comment's really pertinent in that what we discover, and it isn't always the case, but the further you get out of Melbourne into other parts of Victoria, the less, sometimes more, but sometimes the less you get consistency with the central message, which is about being reasonable, being rational, being flexible with our sector. I just had a meeting with Alan Hall in relation to compliance, and he said we are going to pull back on the heavy-handedness with compliance. It's about being reasonable, and so then what we need to make sure is that people who are far further from that decision feel comfortable in being able to make judgments in an environment that's a shifting environment. So that's our daily life here is to try and make sure that everybody feels comfortable with using common sense in this environment rather than continuing to do things they've always done. I think it's just the way it is at the moment. Would you agree, Luke? It can be really challenging.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, that conversation we had the other day with Sonia about the workforce, typically your business continuity plans could be relying on another agency if you had that sort of, event. But the other agency in this case could be decimated as well.
Yeah,
so
I think that's part of the challenge. You're right, Luke. It is, and it's only by going back to Cam's point, is that the way that we collaborate and the way that we team together and understand that at different points in time, we will be more or less challenged by this. We're going to be challenged all the way through, but there's going to be times when, say for example, a neighbouring organisation will just be a little bit stronger, whereas we're feeling really under the pump and really struggling, vice versa. So how do we team together around that and find ways of helping each other out?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'd like to just add to that while people are beginning to appreciate this through crisis and uncertainty, that it is around then a new culture emerging out of that
Yeah.
we then don't go back to those old ways.
Yeah.
And that there is a little bit more kindness as well, that it is more collaborative, that we're not seeing this sort of creep of a corporate approach, sort of a multinational sort of culture that's, I feel, has I've sort of experienced as a small not-for-profit in the sector. And since having come back from Canada, having worked and lived in Canada, to come back to a not-for-profit sector where I feel it has taken on that a very hard culture, business culture. So that is one thing I really am hoping, that we won't then fall back to those old ways, but we will make those commitments that we want to see things going better and that we've learned something from this experience.
That's a great comment, Jen.
I think, Jen, and that takes us to that point 4 about building resilience and preparing for recovery, because we've got some choices ahead of us when we move into recovery about what we want to take from this and learn from this, and how we want to be different going forward, so that as we recover and we move out of this, that we determine the kind of organisational culture and cross-organisational culture that we want to commit to. And I think that was happening before this crisis. So, you know, there's a big movement, and we're, as EY, part of that movement actually, which is around kind of being more human and understanding that our world is not all about the bottom line. It's not all about profit and loss. Yes, we all want to make enough money to run a decent business, give our employees a decent life, and most importantly, deliver great services for people. For us, it's about making a better working world, and that's a deliberate play on better working world, but also a world that works better. And so that kind of focus on humanity, equality and equity, and inclusiveness and sustainability are going to be more important for us than ever after this year. I mean, what a year.
That's right, exactly. What a year. 2021 is going to be better, Sonia.
It is.
I'm going to keep quoting you. It's going to be better. I'm just wondering, for those who are silent, whether I know that you're enjoying it. I am. There are questions from those that aren't on camera or are silent, because definitely we're going to get all this information to you. But I just want to know, are there any comments or questions or any words of wisdom for those of you that are on the Zoom that want to say something? Yes, Catherine, we will get the presentation to you. We're getting lots of positive feedback, which is really lovely. But if there are any particular questions, I mean, the financial analysis is incredibly valuable, Cameron. I think people are going to take that away. I suppose my question is about organisational boards. So we've got a number of CEOs on the telecon, and I'm just wondering whether ourselves with EY could think about whether there would be some benefit in preparing something that might be valuable for boards, that they're out there, they're looking for information, and particularly of not-for-profits, and whether you'd be keen for Cameron and Sonia and Dean and myself and Emma to try and do something that would be valuable for them, and whether you would then promote it to your boards to attend.
Definitely. I think that sounds like a great idea. I think certainly just preparing for this session, and I've got a board meeting on Monday. I think about the poor burden of our CEO and management going through this crisis. So we can definitely do some thinking.
That would be wonderful.
A session together. That
would be wonderful. Are you okay with that, Sonia?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we'd be delighted.
I keep just asking for things. I feel terrible, but I'm so grateful.
Can I tell you, it goes back to what we were just talking about, actually. You know, we're all in this together, and we've got to get through it together. So if we can help each other, let's do it.
Thank you so much.
And we can bring, I think, a really helpful perspective on boards, and most of us are on boards as well. So we kind
exactly.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I don't pretend to know the sorts of people that are on all of your boards, obviously, but at the end of the day, they're people like us who are going through this crisis as well.
Yeah.
They may have their own business, they may have their own responsibilities elsewhere, They may be on other boards, so they're seeing what other organisations are doing. So I think it would be great. I think we will certainly make the offer, but I think it would be very pertinent for them if they had the time to perhaps just spend a bit of time as a group thinking about it. So yeah, certainly comfortable being part of that.
Oh, wonderful. So there's a question here from Jen Davidson, who we work very closely with. Hi, Jen. I'd like to know whether other organisations have developed policies around pandemic leave, paying staff who can't work, telephone workers, children at home. There are real issues now about, whether some organisations in our membership are saying to workers, we will pay for your sick leave, we'll give you an extra 2 weeks if you're forced into isolation. And we are seeing industrial issues around people working from home. They've got their child in the next room, and they're dealing with very private conversations on the phone. This is probably going to be one that we're going to need to think about what does that mean for all of human services, but and also the private sector.
Deb, it's Mark from Ozchild here. We haven't developed policy per se, but what we've done is developed a bunch of principles that we've put to our board, and we had a board meeting on Monday, and that's really important to make sure that your response is in line with the board's expectation for their governance on the organisation. A lot of that, you have to look at what your minimum legal stance on that is as well. But for us, it's also about looking what government's doing. If government's passing funding through to us, if we feel a responsibility to pass that through to our employees, even if they may be doing other functions or other things. So, I'd encourage people to just, if they've got principles, if they've got ideas around that, to run those past their boards to make sure that they're operating in the same direction before things get too far.
I'm just wondering, Mark, because I know Lisa, your CEO, shared with us your risk assessment for attending face-to-face with clients, and I'm just wondering if you'd be happy to share your principles so that people can have a look at them and think about what sort of principles they might want to adopt. It might just give people a starting point.
Sure, yeah, there's two things. There's one around what our principles are in regards to our staffing groups as a whole. And then you're right, we did develop a face-to-face client risk assessment tool, which clearly changes every time government puts in different measures. But we'd be happy to share those with
I'm
anyone.
seeing other people being very prepared to share their work. If they can send it through to Emma, then at least for ourselves and for EY, we can have a look at what's being developed and then synthesise that a bit for the up and coming conversations.
Yeah, and a lot of that, Deb, will depend on so we operate in a range of states, and different governments are saying different things around how they're passing through funding. Victorian government, I think, has been pretty clear on what they're doing. In those conversations that you said Alan Hall's having at the compliance level are very comforting. Any performance-based contracts seem to be kind of put on hold at this point in time, which is really encouraging, which means we can look after our workforce and those people that work in those areas with some level of comfort.
Beautiful, thank you. So, yes, look, a lot of people are forwarding their work, which will be very, very helpful. It's actually just hit 1 o'clock. I know everybody's incredibly busy doing other important work. If there are no other questions, we might start to sign off. But just to remind you of a few things, we are going to do more of these, and Sonia and Cameron and Dina are going to help us do these. We think they're incredibly valuable. We have got notes that Emma's been furiously taking. We get those out to you quite quickly with the slides. We have recorded this, so we will have a look at it to see if it's of a quality that we can distribute, because we think for those who can't be here, sometimes they're just a bit more visual. And if you've got ideas other than the ones that you've proposed of things that you'd like us to do, just drop us a line and let us know, and then we can start thinking about how we'll make those things happen. If I could just get you all to give Sonia and Cameron a bit of a thumbs up, because they've done all this work for us. Yes, thank you. They've done this work for us, and in the spirit of connectivity, as Sonia said, we're really eternally grateful. And so thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So look, lots of thank yous, which is terrific. So stay posted for the next ones of these that we'll be doing in the next week or so. And all of you, please take care.
Great, and
Thank
thanks
you,
so much,
Deb and everybody.
Thank you, and thank you, Emma and Sue and all the team behind the scenes.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take
Bye-bye.
care now. Look after yourselves. Bye.
Bye.
Hooray! That was great. Thanks, Mel.